Hi, I'm Mike Beliveau, and today we're at the West Shore Sportsmen's Association. And our topic for this video is going to be 19th century handgun shooting stances. And the reason we're doing this is because a few weeks ago I got a comment from a viewer who said, in a nutshell, you know, Mike, you always say that you shoot these guns the way they were shot in the 19th century to determine how effective they were in the way they were actually used, as opposed to the way we might use them today. He said, and that's a noble goal, but if that's your goal, why do you shoot like a 20th century bullseye shooter instead of shooting like a 19th century shooter? And he went on to say, of course, they would have shot with their wrists and their elbows bent. Okay, so I gave that some thought. And what I always do with comments is I evaluate if it's a criticism, is it valid? And if I decide it's not valid, then I just let it roll off my back and I move on. But if it is valid, then I think, what am I going to do about it? So at first, honestly, I thought this is not a valid criticism. And the reason I thought that, now I'm going to do a little demonstration, but before I do, I'll just show you. The gun is empty. How can I tell? Because I can see no cartridge heads in here. But give it a fast look, all empty and safe. Okay? So, why did, at first I thought that comment was not true? Well, because I do shoot in a valid 19th century stance. I use the duelist stance, which is like this. And that is an authentic 19th century shooting stance. So at first I was just going to write it off. And of course what he wants me to do is shoot like this. Right? So I thought, you know, I'm using a valid 19th century stance. I'm just not using the one that you prefer. Okay, so I was ready to write this off. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, I've never really researched 19th century stances. I mean, I've encountered them in artwork and that sort of thing, but I never really went to see how were things done predominantly in the real life world of the 19th century. So I decided to do the research and talk about that with you guys today. So as I said, I decided to research actual 19th century shooting stances. And the stance that my commenter was talking about is generally known as the Bisley stance. And you can see an excellent example of it in this Frederick Remington illustration. As I said, that's generally known as the Bisley stance. And there are a lot of people who think that the Bisley stance was named after Colt's Bisley revolver, which is, of course, a version of the single-action Army that has an entirely different grip frame, a low-slung hammer, a different trigger, and basically the Bisley Colt was made for target shooting. And as I say, some people think that the Bisley stance got its name from the Bisley Colt because that stance was the best way to hold on to that Colt. And actually, that's exactly backwards. The Colt was developed to be a target pistol. And it was developed to be more efficient with that particular stance, a target stance. But the actual name of the Bisley Colt and the Bisley stance comes from the Bisley shooting range at the national range in Bisley, England. A lot of people don't realize that the United Kingdom had a National Rifle Association before America did. They had one in the 1860s. Ours didn't come along until 1874. And soon after establishing the National Rifle Association, they set up their national range in Bisley, England. and they had very famous matches there for many years. And that's where the Bisley stance comes from the target stance used by a lot of shooters at the Bisley match. So we know that that stance was used. The question really is, was it universal or not? So the Bisley matches were very interesting, the handgun matches. They were fired at two ranges, 20 yards and 50 yards, 6 shots at each range. And the way it worked was, you had your handgun basically in a low-ready position. The barrel was touching either the tabletop or a rail in front of you. The target popped up, 20 yards away or 50 yards away. It popped up, it was up for 3 seconds, then it went back down. So you had 3 seconds to make your shot. And you had 60 seconds to get off your 6 shots at 20 yards. And then when the range moved back to 50 yards, you had 90 seconds to get off your 6 shots. So that is the match that the Bisley Colt was named after, and that Bisley stance was named after. So, how prevalent was that stance? I think that's an excellent question. And it's not as easy to find information on that as you would think. Because today in the modern world, stance, every trainer's got a little variation. You know, you can find it on any website, you can find 100 books that tell you isosceles stance or Weaver stance and go in great detail as to how they're done. But in the 19th century, that simply was not the case. So finding source material can be a little bit difficult. Now, I did find a book written by a British captain. It was published in 1921. And it's called The Book of the Pistol and Revolver by Captain Hugh B.C. Pollard. And in that book, Pollard describes the best shooting stance as of 1921. And I quote, "The best position is to stand slightly to the left of the target, with the right shoulder slightly advanced and the body at an angle of about 30 degrees. The right foot should be forward and in line with the target, the left about 7 or 8 inches to the rear and almost square with the right foot. The left hand may either rest upon the left hip or the whole arm hang loose, with the hand behind the left buttock. The position should be solid and natural, the weight of the trunk supported evenly by both legs, and here's a crucial part, the right arm should be either fully extended or, as is more usual, slightly flexed." So, according to Captain Pollard, the Bisley stance is the more usual of the two stances, straight or flexed, and basically you're standing in what's almost a modern bullseye position. They usually recommended 45 degrees to the target, modern, which other period sources recommend that as well. So that's kind of Pollard. So we've got Pollard saying that flexed is a little more like it. And if you take a look at this picture, this is Pancho Villa, you know, the famous Mexican revolutionary, and he's shooting his Bisley pistol in the Bisley stance. And it's classic. It's exactly the way Captain Pollard describes it. So take a look at the picture, and there's really no missing it. So is that really the most common way that a gun would be shot, a handgun, in the late 19th and early 20th century? I don't know. I mean, there's not that much written documentation, but there's a fair amount of art. So looking through the art, a friend of mine, Grant Rombach, who's Canadian, sent me quite a few things when I was looking for him. And this is one of a Major Toombs, and he's using the Bisley stance during the Indian Mutiny of 1857. And it is a classic Bisley stance. So obviously it was around in 1857. And here are some other pictures of early 19th century duelists with single-shot pistols using what looks an awful lot like the Bisley stance. So it can go back quite a ways. If we keep looking at the art, and we look at pictures of Frederick Remington, we can see the Bisley stance in many of his pictures. This one's a fight in the street, very famous. This one's called the Sheriff Shooting at Bottles, where he's also employing what is obviously a Bisley stance, left-handed. And then we've got this one where we have a saloon fight going on, and as you can see, the shooter has his elbow bent, his wrist bent, and obviously a Bisley stance. Once again, this is about 1887. And then this one of a hold-up, where once again the shooter's got an exaggerated Bisley stance. So, at least with Frederick Remington paintings, and we can see this getaway shot here, we can see several people shooting in the Bisley stance. So, Frederick Remington portrays this really as what he considered the most common stance. So that's very likely to be encountered in the American West of the 1880s. Now, in this next picture, we can see the Bisley stance being employed in this picture of U.S. Navy handgun training from the turn of the 20th century. So no doubt Bisley's stance is being used quite heavily. The question is it universal? And is it really predominant? Now, despite the photographic evidence of sailors and soldiers, I've got some British soldiers shooting the Bisley stance, the Army Manual of 1861 for the Colt Navy revolver says to extend the right arm with the pistol pointing at the target, no bent, this is quote, no bent elbow or wrist called for. So that's the U.S. Army Manual of Arms for 1861 for the Colt Navy, straight arm. In 1913, the Army's Small Arms Manual says, stand balanced and erect with the arm extended towards the target. The right arm, it goes on to say, the right arm may be slightly bent, although the difficulty of holding the pistol uniformly and of keeping it as well as the forearm in the same vertical plane makes the bent arm grip objectionable. So, the Army said, you can do it, but you're better off not doing it. So the Bisley stance was known by the Army, not favored by them. Now I've got another picture here of the famous exhibition shooter, Annie Oakley. And she's ignoring the Bisley stance in favor of the straight arm stance in this picture. And we know she could hit what she was aiming at. So it appears that it was not universal. Now, in this next picture, I'm going to show you, during World War I, we can see British female officer candidates doing revolver training, and they're all using the Bisley stance. But in the next picture, which is of male officers, World War I, doing their revolver training, you can see only one of them is using a Bisley stance, and the other two are straight arming it. So, used but not universal. Now, an American book published in 1904, and this one was from Project Gutenberg, the other book I bought on Amazon. It's from the book Pistol and Revolver Shooting by A.L.A. Himmelwright, published in 1904. Himmelwright discusses the shooting stances of 12 top handgun shooters of the day. And those stances run the gamut from the Bisley style to the bullseye style. Now let's take a look at some of them. So we've got 12 shooters we're showing you the pictures of. About half of the shooters that Himmelwright shows, and these are all top shooters for their day, used the Bisley stance and the other half used a straight arm. So we can safely assume that by the turn of the century at least, shooting stances were a mixture of the Bisley style and the straight arm style. In fact, I've got a turn of the century photograph taken of the firing line of the famous Bisley range itself. So this picture is from the range at Bisley, England, and it shows a mixture of bent arm and straight arm styles, and the straight arm styles predominate in this picture. So based on all of this, I think it's safe to say that the Bisley stance was in very wide use in the late 19th and early 20th century. But it's also clear that the straight arm style was also very widely used. So I would say that if you're reenacting or if you're testing, you can safely use either of those stances. The one thing you can't use, though, is the duelist stance that I favor, and I'm going to have to modify that, because each of these experts address the duelist stance, and they all disparaged it because it doesn't give the stability that you get from either the straight arm or the Bisley stance, because your feet are in line with the target, and it doesn't give you the stability back and forth. It doesn't anchor you solidly. So I'm going to work on that, because now I know that even though that was a done style at the time, it was not a favored style at all. So I absolutely learned something from doing this. Let's take a look at each of those styles in actual practice and see how they do, see how they feel. The weakness of the dueling stance that I use is that your feet are basically in a line, right? So you don't have that much back and forth stability. Now, it's still a pretty effective stance. Keep it straight. And there you go. Now, the Bisley grip that my correspondent thinks I should be using has some similarities to the duelist stance, but it's got some significant differences. For one thing, you position your feet at 45 degrees to the target, not 180. So you're much more stable. When you draw, instead of extending your arm straight out, you bring your elbow up, keep it bent, keep your wrist bent, and shoot. Okay, so those are two stances from the 19th century. The duelist stance is actively discouraged by most experts. The Bisley stance, not really embraced, let me say, but not actively discouraged. The stance that most of the experts recommend from 1860 up to 1920, as far as I can see, is ironically what we would call the bullseye target stance today. Now, just like the Bisley stance, you would stand 45 degrees to your target, but instead of bending the arm, we are going to keep the arm, the elbow, and the wrist straight. Okay, so I put a box of ammo through the gun. I ran each of the three styles, the duelist style, the Bisley style, and the straight arm style. And I gotta say, I'm not a fan of the Bisley style. I mean, it has some benefits. The main benefit is it positions the sights much closer to your eye. So it gives you a good fast sight picture. I'll give you that. It's handy for that. However, you noticeably get more muzzle flip because your wrist and your elbow aren't locked. And I didn't like that. So there's a trade-off there. And it's not as easy to be 100% repeatable with it as it is with a straight arm style. So does it work? Yes, it does. And in fact, if that was a style I had to use, I would be quite confident using the Bisley stance. I hit every time, and I would not be hesitant to get into a gunfight with that, provided I did a little training with it. But is it my favorite style? No, not at all. In fact, I much prefer the similar style, but the straight arm style. And I'm probably going to be modifying my shooting to do that, which is the way I shoot. When I shoot modern guns one-handed, that's the way I shoot them. So this is not a big stretch for me. Because basically, it is the style used by modern bullseye target shooters. And why? Because it works. Right? Obviously, they figured out back then it works, and it still works. So that's probably the historic 19th century style that I'm going to migrate to, not the Bisley style. But I'll do it every now and then. I mean, it's fun to do, and it definitely has that classic look. Right? You can't shoot another way that screams Old West the way that Bisley style does. So it's got a certain cool factor to it. So anyway, that's this week's video. I learned something doing it. I hope you learned something watching it. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you know what to do. Give it a big thumbs up, do the comments, all that stuff. I know I haven't had a video out for a few weeks. I had posted on Facebook that I was not going to. I've not been sick. Nothing particularly bad's been happening. It's just a lot of life has been getting in the way. We had the Thanksgiving holiday, and there's a lot of stuff to get ready for in that. There's also some more stuff going on with Duelist Den. So I've spent some time with the lawyers, getting that worked out. I'm waiting. Whether or not this is good news still remains to be seen. But I'm waiting for the judge to, put the stamp of approval on what's going on. This is not something that I wanted to do. This is something that's coming out of North Hopewell Township. But until the judge put the stamp of approval on it, there's no point in talking about it. So when he does, I'll probably give you an update, tell you what's going on there. It's neither good nor bad. I'll just tell you that. It's just, it could be either. It just all depends on, what those people do from here. So anyway, I'll fill you in on that. But been a bunch of stuff going on. There's a bunch of stuff still to do here in December. I mean, we're heading into the Christmas holidays and everything. So if you don't see a video every week, try to be understanding. Part of it's the weather. We just had a bout of kind of bad weather here. And you can see it's kind of cloudy and mucky today, but at least it's not actively, raining. And we're going to get some rain and snow in a couple of days. So, we'll just try to persevere. I've got a few things to do. I got the volunteer rifle to cover. I want to do a shootout of Colt 1861 Navies, Pieta versus Uberti. So I've got the guns. It's just a matter of I get all the ammo loaded. Get paper cartridges made, get everything done. It's just a matter of getting a day out here where the weather is not brutal, and being able to get it done. And a lot of stuff going on at home is not a bad thing. It's just we're having work done on the house, and I got contractors in there all the time, and I got to make decisions, and it's hard to get away. So if you don't see me, don't worry about me. And I know I'm talking too much, so I'll see you next week, maybe. Till then, bye.